Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk a little bit about gluten. So a lot of people have a lot of questions about gluten, what it means to be gluten-free, what it means to have celiac disease, and how much of this is actually marketing and how much of it is based in fact. So we're going to talk about some of the, let's say, the downsides to consuming gluten, and then we're going to talk about how marketing has taken advantage of a situation and made it a really healthy trend to consume things that are gluten-free. So firstly, one of the main differences between being gluten-free by choice and being celiac is a disease process. So being celiac, which I am myself actually, means that I cannot digest the protein gluten. So I actually have what is considered an autoimmune disease. So when I consume gluten myself, what happens is I end up with weird patches on my skin. So even you can see my chest right now, it's permanently like this. I almost have like altered skin tone and texture. It will always be this way. And there was a point in my life where I lost almost all of my hair. So I had large patches on my scalp where I had no hair at all. I lost my eyebrows and my eyelashes. So my immune system essentially went into overdrive from consuming gluten. And as a result, it attacked my hair follicles and then they fall out. So other people have different experiences when they consume gluten. Some people get gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation. Some people will get like vitiligo on their skin, so they get depigmentation disorders. Some people will get like chronic fatigue syndrome. Sometimes it can just lead to another disease process because when the body is compromised, essentially it opens the door for another disease. So being celiac, I don't have a choice whether I can consume gluten. So then there's the flip side of the coin. Gluten-free has become very trendy and it's become healthy to not eat gluten. Back to what I was talking about. So there is a lot of marketing around being gluten-free. And so I'm going to outline the first reasons why I would say that some humans, not all, should consider reducing the amount of gluten they eat. The first thing that we're going to talk about is that the wheat grain itself, which gluten is found inside, has actually been modified, which means that it no longer resembles the grain even that we consumed 50 years ago. So when we did that modification to the grain, what we essentially did was made it drought and pest resistant, but we've also made it very, very hard to digest. So when we put an indigestible or a difficult to digest grain inside the intestines, what happens is inflammation. So when we have inflammation inside the gut, we get systemic or full body symptoms. So altering that grain has made it for some people that they would have an intolerance. So that's very different than having an allergy or having celiac disease, but to be intolerant to it just means that you have the inability to actually break it down, which a large percentage of the population actually do. So if when you eat wheat, you have symptoms like gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, all those things that we talked about earlier, sometimes that means that you're not digesting the wheat grain the way that you're supposed to. Secondly, another reason why gluten and wheat have become an allergen for a large percentage of the population or an intolerant substance for them is that we have overexposure. So if you look at most packaged processed products at this point on the shelves, it all contains wheat. So we eat wheat not only by choice when we have sandwiches and wraps and croissants and all those beautiful things, but we eat it in products that are used as fillers. So wheat is a really great binding substance. That gluten actually causes, let's say, like a jelly-like substance that'll hold structures together. So that's really great in a granola bar. It's really great in cereals. So they use wheat as an additive because obviously it brings nutrients with it. But unfortunately for a lot of people, that overexposure and constant consuming of those products has led to people having those intestinal upsets and all those kind of intolerance or allergic symptoms that most of the population suffer from. One of the other reasons that gluten has become a bit of an issue for some individuals is that we live in a relatively sterile environment. So we have come into an age where we're terrified of bacteria. We don't want our kids to touch contaminated surfaces. We don't want to touch contaminated surfaces. So we use Lysol wipes, antibacterial cleaners, cleansers, hand soaps, those sterile gels that we wash our hands with constantly, which means that we have essentially wiped out good and bad bacteria from the surface of our skin and ingesting it as well. So some people would pose the question that killing the bacteria on the surface is a good thing because you are killing bad bacteria. But my argument for that is that we also kill the good bacteria. So we need good bacteria on our skin to maintain skin health, to maintain gut health. Our immune health is all dependent on those good bugs that we're now killing with those antimicrobial sprays and wipes. So what happens when we remove all the good bacteria from our hands and from the foods and the surfaces that we would then consume from? Essentially, our immune system goes on high alert. So our immune system is designed essentially that there's like a sentinel at the gate. So that sentinel is there to determine whether what you've ingested or breathed in, whatever it may be, is safe or unsafe. He then hits a panic button. He says this is something that we need to react to, or he goes back and has a nap. So unfortunately, when we remove all that good bacteria, that sentinel kind of loses track of what's good and what's bad, and he hits the panic button for almost everything, including gluten. Peanuts are actually a really good example of this as well. There's more peanut allergies than there ever has been in the history of the world, and some of that has to do with the fact that we've wiped out a lot of our bacterial colonies that protect us and keep our immune system in a neutral state and keep that sentinel, let's say, in a resting state or having a nap at his desk. The last reason why gluten can sometimes be an issue for people is something called zonulin. What that zonulin does is it reacts inside our gut and it causes inflammation. So inflammation isn't always a really horrible thing, but unfortunately when we're consuming wheat, like I talked about overexposure, on a regular basis, that inflammation can get out of hand. So we're constantly ingesting a substance that causes inflammation, repeated overexposure, and then that can create allergies, food intolerances, all those things that we've been talking about. So zonulin isn't a bad substance, but just in our bodies it happens to react and cause inflammation. So you can see to my point earlier that not eating it on a regular basis is not something that you're actively ingesting every day may be advisable. So I don't have an issue with gluten for most of my clients. If they want to eat it, you absolutely can. But if you have an underlying inflammatory disorder, an intolerance, or an allergy, I'm definitely going to recommend that you limit its consumption. So a good rule of thumb is consuming it every 4 days. This would be considered a rotation diet. What that means is that you're not having an accumulative effect of that overexposure. So it's not day in, day out eating it and causing a reaction. So every 4 days gives your body an opportunity to go through that natural inflammatory response, calm back down, and then you ingest it again. It goes through that natural ebb and flow. So we always want to keep the immune system in check, and doing a rotation or a 4-day rotation would be ideal for consuming gluten. So that's only for a percentage of the population. The other portion of the population doesn't seem to have any effects from gluten whatsoever. So here's the flip side of the coin. That marketing has taken some of this factual scientific information and it has blown it out of proportion. So they have used fear-mongering in a lot of cases to scare people into eating gluten-free products. So it's gone as far now that you see bags of carrots, potatoes, and sweet potatoes at the grocery store that actually say gluten-free on the package. So that's really wonderful for people who are newly diagnosed as celiac and maybe they're trying to navigate their way through the world of what's gluten-free and what's not. But it's really become a marketing monster for people who are trying to navigate through this world of, should I eat this or is this bad for me? So today, my major point is that marketing does not always have our best interests at heart. Sometimes it's about the bottom line, it's about selling products. So just make sure you always educate yourself. If you have symptoms associated with consuming gluten, then limit its consumption. Maybe take my advice and limit it to consuming it every 4 days if you are experiencing symptoms. Or if you would like to go totally gluten-free by choice, then absolutely do so. But make sure that you understand and you're making an educated decision, because marketing can really sway how we feel and sometimes give us misperceptions on what is actually healthy versus what is actual scientific fact. So in conclusion, gluten-free isn't for everybody unless you have an underlying disease process, allergy, or intolerance like we talked about. But if you do have negative effects, once again, always consume it in rotation. And lastly, if you are someone who is struggling with weight gain or the inability to lose weight, removing some gluten from your diet can actually be really helpful. Not only because it's a carbohydrate group and that tends to be pretty effective when we're talking about weight loss, but because that inflammation that gluten creates naturally, that inflammation actually limits the ability to lose weight. So if we have inflammation inside the cells, the body is focused on removing that inflammation, not on removing fat. So a lot of my clients who are actually weight loss clients, I would definitely encourage them to limit its consumption just because it's not conducive to weight loss on a lot of different planes. I've given you a little bit of fact and a little bit of fiction about the consumption of gluten. So if you have negative effects with consuming gluten, I'll challenge you to ask yourself, should you actually be consuming this? Do you have an allergy? Do you have an intolerance? Is it just difficult for your body to digest? See you next time.
That's like your signature fuck. The way you say it is like your signature.
My signature fuck. Okay. Fuck. Just a second, Ron. I'm just gonna